Hello everybody, this is Dr. Kevin Connors, another video on Autoimmune Basics 201. Why test for foods? I don't have any food sensitivities. Why should I test for foods? What does that make any sense? It makes a huge difference with autoimmune issues. If you have chronic mold, chronic Lyme, you know you have Hashimoto's, you know you've been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, and you don't do correct food diagnostics on your blood, you are missing out. And you're still having struggles, then you're really missing out. If you got your autoimmune disease really under control and you're not having any symptoms, well then that's great, you don't need this video. But for those who their autoimmune disease flares, causes them misery, you really need to test for what other things are causing these flares, what other things are causing damage to your body. So we're going to dig into this. So remember the stages of autoimmune disease. Stage 1, silent autoimmune disease. You may show elevated antibodies in a specific antibody test, but you really have no symptoms, no loss of tissue, no problems. But remember, you can move from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 literally overnight. So knowing that you have antibodies to self-tissue, let's say you have Hashimoto's, you have TPO antibodies, they're elevated, you don't even have any thyroid symptoms, your thyroid levels are within normal level, you don't have tissue destruction, you're in stage 1, you can flip to stage 3 literally overnight. Stage 2 is you're starting to develop symptoms, don't have loss of tissue yet. So in that case, with thyroid, TPO antibodies, you might have fatigue issues, you might have some loss of hair, you might have other low thyroid, hypothyroid symptoms that could go along with Hashimoto's, but you still have normal blood levels of your TSH, your T3, your T4, your reverse T3 and such. And then stage 3, you have the elevated antibodies, you have symptoms, and now you have measurable tissue destruction. Don't wait till you get to that level. Well, most people that are watching this video are at that level. So there's still hope. We got to dig in. You know, most common thing we hear is, you know, I've been to everywhere and I've spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. Well, I am going to ask you, if you're going to be wise, to spend a few more $100 on some proper testing, because it can literally change your life, okay? And you don't need a doctor to help you. If you follow this course and you do these tests, I'm going to teach you through proper interpretation of the test the best I can, that you can help manage yourself and manage your life. Because so much of it is what you're going to do, not what a doctor is going to do to you. It's going to be what you're going to do with the knowledge that you now have. So some key concepts that we need to know about dietary protein immune reactivity. And understand, a lot of this is coming from Dr. Tatis Karatsian's work. A lot of this is coming from Cyrex's lab work. So I want to give credit to where credit is due. I put Dr. Tatis's credits on each slide because he has been my major mentor, and I want to give him all the credit for teaching me everything I know. So some key concepts. This is a key one. Dietary proteins change their antigenicity if they're cooked or they're raw. So you need to do an immunoglobulin test with cooked and raw foods. Really, really super important. A cooked protein is different than a raw protein. If you did a test other than Cyrex Labs, most likely all they were testing was the raw food substance. They're not testing for cooked food. So unless you're eating everything raw, it's not a really valid test whatsoever. And if they're not doing immunoglobulin testing, it's really not a valid test at all. So you have to look at Cyrex Labs, and we're going to talk about that. I have $0, connection with Cyrex Labs. It's just that they're the best lab on the market. Next, dietary proteins can change their antigenicity when they're combined with other foods during cooking, or even combined with other foods during eating. Ugh, well, how do I know? Oh my gosh. This gets very confusing for the person who's got an autoimmune issue, who's getting all these flares, who can't get off the couch. It can be because of what you ate together. in your meal last night. Third, dietary proteins can cross-react with other food proteins. So they can cross-react with other proteins in other foods. Fourth, dietary proteins can cross-react with our own body tissue proteins. Perfect example of that. We'll go through some more examples, but a perfect example of that is gluten with your thyroid. The TPO antibody is a molecular mimic to gluten. So if you eat gluten and you have positive TPO antibodies, you can fire an immune reaction and start damaging your thyroid gland. That's why I don't care whether you did testing or not. If you have Hashimoto's, you better not be eating any gluten. You could say the same thing. Casein antibodies can cross-react with gluten. That's one of the cross-reactants with gluten is casein, which is dairy, which can then fire TPO antibodies. And a person that has TPO antibodies, that is Hashimoto's, that is positive antibodies for the thyroid gland, shouldn't be eating gluten, nor should they really be eating dairy. Now, there's testing that can be done. We're going to talk about the Cyrex 3X, the Cyrex 4, and the Cyrex 10 tests that can measure these. But some of the work has to be done by just clinical observation, and I mean that what you do on yourself. Boy, when I eat this, I tend to have a reaction. I tend to feel more tired the next day. I tend to just feel achy. My joints hurt. My muscles hurt. You have to pay attention to this. And lastly on this list, dietary proteins can induce immune reactivity by either specific cross-reactivity or by direct immune pathway activation. So we'll talk about these things in more detail. So foods and autoimmunity, they can cause cross-reactivity reactions. That's where it gets very confusing, and you have to do some deeper tests to find out these things, and you have to look at cross-reactive food patterns. So we're going to have all those downloadable documents. There's different cross-reactive foods with casein. There's different cross-reactive foods with scallops. There's different cross-reactive foods with tuna. There's different cross-reactive foods. So if you're positive, let's say, and you're testing for tuna sensitivity, you might go, oh gosh, I don't even eat tuna. I don't even like tuna. I've never eaten tuna in my life. How can I possibly be positive for the peptides, the amino acid sequences in tuna? It's because the amino acid sequences in tuna can be very similar to other amino acid sequence, i.e., that is a cross-reactive food. So, well, maybe it's the cross-reactive food for tuna happens to be tilapia, and happens to be salmon, and happens to be other things that you may eat a lot of, and that's why tuna is coming up positive. So you might not eat tuna, but you can eat the cross-reactive food, and you don't think you're having a reaction, but that is actually what's causing the immune reaction. And then you get the direct immune pathway activation, which is a little bit easier to understand, but it's that cross-reactive interaction that can be the one that's stabbing you in the back. And if you don't identify those things, you can never seem to get better. That's the person who, I just can't get better. I'm staying away from all these foods and I just can't get better. We have to identify what these are so you can best take care of yourself. The antigenicity of individual dietary proteins can be changed when combined with other food proteins. So, super important. So I may not react to salmon and I may not react to potatoes, but when I have salmon and potatoes together, cooked together, they can actually change the protein structure. They can combine, and when that combination takes place, I can react to that. That's one problem with lectins that we'll talk about later, is that it tends to cause agglutination, which that term means proteins are combining together and you end up forming new proteins, neoproteins, that you're reacting to these neoproteins. It's very frustrating. So you have to pay attention to real world combining, meaning like daily, I notice when I eat this and this together, I have a reaction. But if I eat just potatoes, I'm fine, but if I eat potatoes with salmon, then I have a problem. I seem to not feel good that rest of that day. What is it? I can't figure that out. That may be a certain prepared food that you're buying. So muffin, let's say, it's gluten-free, but I react when I eat this certain brand of gluten-free muffin, but I don't react when I eat this one. Well, it could be a couple things. Could be a cross-reactive thing that you're eating. Maybe you have cross-reactivity with a different type of starch or almond flour, and you're eating a gluten-free almond flour, but you actually react to almond and you never did the test. That's why it's beneficial to do the testing. Array 3X, 4, and 10. We'll go into detail about that. Or it could be a real-world combination of that food, that it's just the combination of these different things that together they're forming neoproteins, and I'm reacting to the neoproteins that's formed when that muffin is cooked. So we have to pay attention to these things. We need to do the testing to get our plan of attack down, but then we need to pay attention to real world life things. I tend to react to this specific product. Okay, so in the case of an immune reaction, if two food proteins share similar sequences of amino acids, then antibodies made for one protein may bind to the similar amino acid sequence of another protein. So an example, the consumed food has an amino acid sequence of this on this slide. Foods not consumed have a very similar amino acid sequence. So, but this example is, okay, let's say I'm not consuming these certain foods because I have a reaction to it, but now I'm reacting to these other foods that did not show positive on my test. It's because they have very similar amino acid sequences. That's what we call cross-reaction, and that's what we have to pay attention to. Here's just a pretty picture of some cross-reactivity things. Now I'm going to give you very detailed cross-reactants to all these different foods, so that in downloadable format on this module, so you can look at them in detail if you do these testings. But we'll go to the top of the list. A legume, let's say I have a food sensitivity to it. It's showing positive for peanut, but it's not showing positive for peas, lentils, and beans. But I tend to react when I eat peas. What's the deal with that? Because there's a very similar amino acid sequence. Therefore, you can get cross-reactant reactions from these other foods. Do you understand? Even though peas didn't show positive on my test, I may still have a reaction to peas because it's a very similar amino acid sequence, and that cross-reaction, then my body can pick up and it stimulates an antibody reaction when I eat peas. Even though I don't have antibodies to peas, I only have antibodies to peanuts. That's what a cross-reaction is. And in this article that was published, it showed about a 5% risk with peanuts cross-reacting with these. Don't pay attention to that. You're going to have to pay attention to real-world things that are going on in your life. Go down to cow's milk here. Cow's milk, if you have a sensitivity to casein and you eat hamburger from a cow, there's about a 10% chance that you could actually cross-react to the beef. But you'll have about a 90% chance or more of cross-reacting to goat milk, because the casein in goat milk, though it's different, it's very similar, has a similar amino acid sequence. The chance of you cross-reacting to that is very high. So I know some people that cannot eat any dairy, any cow's cheese, but they can eat goat cheese. They're not getting the same cross-reactant. Or they might have some immune tolerance to that for a period of time, and then they start reacting to it. They need to take that back out of their diet and calm that immune system down again. So I know it gets confusing. I'm going to give you a list of cross-reactants to all the different foods that are on the lists of the different testing, so that you can look yourself and go, oh, that's why I react to this. It's because of, it's a cross-reactant, a known cross-reactant, meaning that it has a very similar amino acid sequence to the thing that I know that I'm sensitive to. I know I'm sensitive to shellfish and shrimp. That's why I can't eat lobster either. Follow me? Stay with me. It will get simpler. So if the immune reaction to a particular food, protein shares a similar sequence of amino acids, with another food protein, the patient may test positive in lab results, even if the patient is no longer consuming the food. This is really important because I get people that are really upset that might say, I had a person the other day come up positive to scallops, and she said, I don't ever eat scallops. I never eat scallops. I haven't eaten scallops for 15 years. Why are they testing positive for scallops? It's because the amino acid sequence in scallops is similar to something else they happen to be consuming at the present time, and they're reacting to those things in a cross-reactive way. They're developing IgA antibodies to the protein in scallops, even though they're not eating scallops. So you got to look at the cross-reactive foods. Super important. This is a major thing that people miss. And when you miss this, you go crazy because you can't figure out why you have this constant inflammatory process. And I've already eliminated everything in my diet that the test that I did revealed. That's why you look at your test and you have to look at the cross-reactive list, because if you're still having problems when you've eliminated things that were positive on your food sensitivity test, it is most likely because you're still consuming a cross-reacted food that is a similar amino acid sequence. Hammer this home. Cross-reactivity can occur between dietary proteins, and we just got finished, other food proteins. But here's another bad thing, and this can even be worse. Cross-reactivity can occur between dietary proteins and human tissue proteins due to molecular mimicry. I use the example with gluten and your thyroid gland. So anybody that's got thyroid issues, Hashimoto's or Graves' disease, better not be eating gluten. And you should go one step further and look at all the cross-reacted foods to gluten and stay off those too. If you want to stop the destruction of your thyroid gland and the symptoms that go along with it, you have to look at the molecular mimicry. Foods, different proteins in different foods can cross-react with human tissue proteins because the molecular mimicry, the protein shape conformation is very similar. The antibody binds to both things. If I have TPO antibodies to my thyroid gland, it's going to bind to gluten and some of the cross-reactants to gluten, and therefore cause an immune reaction and further destruction of that tissue should I consume that dietary protein, in this case, gluten. So here's a perfect example. You look at these three proteins at the bottom of the slide. They're totally different proteins, but they have very similar look to them. That's what's called molecular mimicry. And the antibody can bind in that same binding site on these three different proteins and cause that same reaction. Very important. Molecular mimicry is very important. Here's another example of shellfish. There's 100 different proteins in shellfish. So we're talking about shrimp. One of these 100 proteins in shellfish is tropomyosin. Tropomyosin is a protein also found in your body. It's found in your muscles. So if you have if you're showing antibodies, you've created antibodies against shrimp, okay? That is antibodies against tropomyosin in shrimp. You can actually cross-react. When you eat shrimp, it can cross-react and have those antibodies attack your own muscle cells. Very dangerous. So you're eating shrimp, and you could have people think you're doing a food sensitive test because you're trying to get rid of a tummy ache. It has nothing to do with a tummy ache. Okay, it can cause a tummy ache, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about an autoimmune reaction. So you're eating this shrimp that you have antibodies against via the test, and then it is firing that antibody that's attacking the tropomyosin in your own muscles and damaging your own muscles. So tropomyosin is found in skeletal muscles. This is where a person might say, oh my gosh, I eat this and I just ache all over. I don't know what it is. I ache all over. But not only do you have to look at the shellfish, maybe the shrimp that you have antibodies against, you have to look at the cross-reactants to that shrimp so that you're not eating this thing and it's causing attack on your own skeletal muscles and just eroding your muscles. Bad things. So you look at the cross-reactants. This is interesting. I pulled up the cross-reactant list for shrimp. Is Burgdorferi antibodies. So you have antibodies to Burgdorferi. That's the main bacterial component of Lyme disease. You're firing a reaction to anywhere that you have Lyme disease still in your body. Epstein-Barr virus, anti-Epstein-Barr virus antibodies. You have antibodies to shellfish. You're eating shellfish. You're gonna react. Your Epstein-Barr is gonna flare up. So not just tropomyosin. Also, you see, it reacts to T3 and T4. So shellfish is gonna react to your thyroid. Oh, this gets so frustrating. What, can I not eat anything? We're going to talk about that. We have solutions to that. Calm down. But if you're still having problems, this is how deep you need to dig. Granted, you're not watching this video. If you don't have any symptoms and you're feeling great, you're not watching this video. You're watching this video because you have problems nobody's been able to figure out, and you've been and spent, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, some people have told us. Well, I'm starting to give you some answers, hopefully. You're digging into the things that can fire an immune reaction and cause self-destruction. So remember, when you have an autoimmune disease, when you fire an immune reaction to that gland or organ or tissue site, it's causing self-destruction. Self-destruction, you are going down a pathway where you could lose all your cells and be in a situation that it's not very good. That's Parkinson's, that's MS, that's dementia. I mean, there's so much destruction of tissue at a certain point, it's not going to regenerate. Some of these tissues don't regenerate very well. You have to put the brakes on it. You have to get serious about this stuff. That's why we're getting deep into this. Okay, here's another tropomyosin from tilapia. So antibodies against vertebrate tropomyosins may cross-react with human endogenous. It's your own cells, your own tropomyosins in your muscle cells. Autoimmunity to tropomyosins have been implicated in ulcerative colitis and a lot of different disorders. You're going to see it. I have only pulled up this article right here, but there's multiple articles about autoimmune reactions to tropomyosin and how it affects, because you have muscles that surround your intestinal tract. It's a bad thing, you guys. It's something you really got to pay attention to. And then this is information about molecular mimicry with different foods to human tissues. There's a certain human tissue cell called aquaporins. Aquaporins is partly how your cells communicate to one another. It also has aquaporins are embedded in cell membranes. It's how you absorb things through your cells. It's part of the lipopolysaccharide of your cell membranes. All your cells have aquaporins. You have aquaporins in the extracellular matrix. If you have immune reactions, if you've created antibodies to soy aquaporins, corn aquaporins, spinach aquaporins, or tomato aquaporins, they have found that they actually cross-react because of molecular mimicry to human aquaporins. What kind of symptoms could that cause? Oh, just about anything. Literally just about anything. This could be a major reason why a person is absorbing things into their cells that they shouldn't be absorbing into the cells. This could be a major reason. This could be a tie to cancer. This could be a tie to just a hyper-inflammatory disease. When you have damage to your own aquaporins, you're not going to be able to absorb nutrients into the cell. You're going to have mitochondrial disease and dysfunction, energy issues, because you're not going to be able to make energy for cell function and reproduction. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So testing for these are so important. It's so important. That's where we talk about the array 3X, the array 4, and the array 10. Test for these things. You want to know this stuff so that you stay away from this stuff so you don't move into an irreversible disorder. detection of antibodies against human and plant aquaporins in patients with multiple sclerosis. I threw in a couple articles here. Hashimoto's, same thing. And this actually ties to thyroperoxidase. These is TPO antibodies for patients with Hashimoto's encephalopathy, meaning inflammation in the brain, because the TPO antibodies bind to cerebellar astrocytes. Astrocytes is a type of glial cell in the brain. You have astrocytes throughout the brain, but in the cerebellum is the back part of the brain that controls really fine movement and basically controls your spine and eyes, eye movement, and your coordination. So when you end up with inflammation in the cerebellum, and again, gluten, casein, stimulating TPO antibodies, it's going to fire to the cerebellum and cause damage to the cerebellum. You're going to start to find issues with cerebellar ataxia issues. Very important. So it's not just, oh, I just damaged the thyroid and I'm just taking Synthroid, so I'm fine. It's way deeper than that. So pay attention to this stuff. Here's an example of just 10 selected foods and their degrees of reactivity with antibodies. So just talking about the thyroid again, thyroglobulin, T3 and T4. How common it is to have these reactivities, these cross reactions that equally damage the organ that we're talking about. This is just talking about the thyroid. We could use the same examples. I could pull up examples for the brain, which gets even scarier. And if you're having any brain issues and lack of clear thinking and complete fatigue, can't get off the couch, it gets even more scary. So it's so important to dig in and find these things. So this is just an example of gluten. So many people think they do not have a gluten sensitivity. You need to do the testing. Just because you don't get a stomach ache when you eat gluten does not mean anything. So the trigger is gluten. You're eating gluten. You might not have any symptoms from eating gluten, but there's always a target autoimmunity that's tested for in the 3X and the 4 array. In this case, in this example, the transglutaminase 2, it's a human body enzyme that's targeted, and that causes intestinal issues because that's where that is located. And then these people will, get a biopsy. They'll see damage to the intestines, and it can be irreversible. And then as soon as you remove the gluten, healing can take place, but you have to remove the gluten. There's other transglutaminases that are affected with gluten. Transglutaminase 3 affects the skin. People end up with skin issues. That can be a psoriasis type issue. Transglutaminase 6 is the scariest. It directly affects the cerebellum, even if the person has no TPO antibodies that we discussed a couple slides before. So you end up with cerebellum ataxia. This is part of your brain. And when you have decay or degeneration from neural tissue does not regenerate very well. This could be permanent damage, and we don't want that. So pay attention to these things. So we're talking about array 3. It measures these transglutaminases, measures if you have antibodies to the transglutaminases already, and then it measures other gluten proteins. Remember, if you did a food sensitivity test through someplace else and they test for gluten and it just said gliadin and it was negative, that really means nothing. You have to look at the peptides. So without getting too complicated here, the protein of gluten is gliadin, and that's a very long chain protein. Think of it a long chain of beads on a pearl necklace, and all those beads are amino acids. So that's what a protein is a specific sequence of amino acids. That's what a protein is. And then as you chew that up and gobble it up and swallow it, you've broken some of that protein into different parts of protein. That's the whole idea of digestion. You think of it as you're snipping apart different, that whole chain of that pearl necklace. Now those are called peptides. So you have to do an immune panel that's going to measure the gliadin peptides. These are all the gliadin peptides listed here. So it will snip it apart in certain ways. So you have enzymes that enter into your, that come from your parotid gland. When you start chewing food and you have HCl in your stomach, and then enzymes that are secreted into your duodenum that are made by your pancreas. You have enzymes that are coming from your liver and from your bile that's breaking down your food. In the case of gluten, it's breaking down gliadin into its different peptides and all the way down to an amino acid sequence that's a single amino acid or a double amino acid, two together, called a dipeptide, and that's how we're supposed to absorb them. The problem is we have damaged gut wall. We absorb these peptides that are larger sequences, these 15 mer, 17 mer, 33 mer peptides, and then our body, our immune system looks at them and goes, what in the heck are you? We need to make an antibody against it to kill it. Will it ever kill? It's not a living organism. No. Now you have circulated antibodies to alpha gliadin 33 mer, and every time you eat gluten, it's going to break it down into alpha gliadin 33 mer before it finally breaks it down to an amino acid if you have an adequate digestive enzyme concentration. But you'll have a reaction, you'll have an immune reaction to the alpha gliadin 33 mer if you have antibodies to alpha gliadin 33 mer, because antibodies are going to be throughout your bloodstream and in the lumen of the intestines. Oh, I know that was a lot. If you have to rewind and listen to that again, do it about 4 or 5 times, because this is super important. You have to measure peptides. You have to measure the peptides, not just gliadin. The chance that you have a sensitivity to just gliadin is not very high. That means gliadin, the entire giant molecule of that protein, had to get through across the gut border. Then you really know you have a damaged gut border in order for you to create antibodies against that, in order for you to fire an immune reaction against that. Whether you really got problems, most likely you have antibodies, IgG and IgA antibodies, and you have to do a test that measures both of those that against the different peptides. Super important. Array 3X measures that. So if you have exposure to gluten, you could have immune reaction against gluten a couple different ways, with enteropathy, meaning damage to the gut. So you might have an immune reaction that you see and you feel damage to the gut, could cause tissue inflammation, could cause gluteomorphine reaction, which fires directly to the brain, and it's going to affect your neurochemical imbalance. It's going to cause brain fog, brain issues, damage to the brain, cerebellar ataxia, and things like that we just discussed. You can also have tissue autoimmunity. It can cross-react with myelin antibodies. If you should test for these too. This is the array 7X. We'll talk about that in another video. Cerebellum antibodies, parietal cell antibodies, islet cell antibodies causing pancreatic issues and diabetes. Thyroid peroxidase antibodies. This is causing Hashimoto's. It's going to react directly with Hashimoto's, like we talked about. It can cause issues with your heart. Intrinsic factor. You're not going to absorb B12. You can have an autoimmune reaction to intrinsic factor, and that's why you have fatigue issues, because you're not absorbing B12 no matter how much B12 you have. It can react with GAD antibodies, so you can overexcite the GAD gene, and you're producing way too much glutamate from glutamine consumption, and now your glutamate factor raises very high in your brain, which is the major cause of ADD, ADHD, at least one major cause of it, the major cause of anxiety issues. And it will, if you have any cancer in your brain, it is a major fuel source for cancer. Brain cancer. So you talk about, okay, this only has to do with stomach problems. If I eat gluten, hopefully I'm drilling this into you that you have to test for all these other things, because it could be far more implicated from stomach problems to something more serious. But let's say, oh, I don't have any enteropathy, any damage to my gut when I eat gluten. So without enteropathy, the right side of that screen, you could have HLA-DQ2 or 8 genotypes. That's your gene profile, can lead to full-blown celiac disease. Without that genotype, it can lead to later gluten enteropathy over time. Remember, you're going through this autoimmune reaction. You have this, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. It can flip from stage 1 to stage 3 quite quickly. This is the array 3X from Cyrex. It tests all these different things that we went over before. And remember, the yellow is 1 range equivalent over normal, 2 is the red. That doesn't necessarily mean the severity of the person's problem. It really means the severity of how many antibodies you're creating. But how many antibodies you're creating to that thing does not necessarily equate to your reaction and your problem with it. So we talked about that before. So it goes way beyond gluten. It goes through all the different cross-reactants, all the different foods that you could look at. This is the array 4, where you're looking at all the cross-reactivity to gluten, how you could, I'm gluten-free, but I eat chocolate, and I'm still having brain fog, or I'm drinking coffee or sesame or whatever it possibly is. You want to look at the big picture. These are the reasons why I've done everything and I still can't get better. The truth is, you didn't do everything. We didn't look at everything. So we need to keep digging and looking. And I would rather give you the power to do these tests and look at them themselves and make the changes yourselves. So you don't have to spend, a fortune at a doctor. I'm not saying you shouldn't go to a doctor, but that these are things that you have to do. You have to make those dietary changes. So I'm empowering you with this information. This is the array 4 test, where it tests the cross-reactivities. The other one was the array 3X. And this is really what we're looking at. Intestinal permeability, that's leaky gut syndrome. You damaged your intestinal wall cells, so they're separated. You're absorbing things that you should never have absorbed. You have peptides that should never have gotten through. That's how you create these sensitivities. Gluten reactivity, it's a negative cycle, causes a greater intestinal permeability. Well, I don't really have a problem, so I ate just a little bit of gluten, caused more fire in the gut, even though you felt nothing, and it's causing more intestinal permeability. It's ramping up the autoimmunity at the bottom line. So you're getting immune cross-reactivity, cross-reactive foods. You're getting cross-reactive autoimmune sites in your body. And then you're just causing, a ramped up loss of self-tolerance. You're going to become more and more sensitive to more things, more and more sensitive to, these are the people that they're sensitive to EMFs, they're sensitive to smells, they're sensitive to any type of chemical, they're sensitive. You have to help build self-tolerance. These people have lost all self-tolerance. And the best place to start is food, okay? Well, I'm so sensitive to smells, I can't go in stores. Okay, well then you have to get back to the food, because you have to eat food every day, right? So that is where you're getting, you think you're getting a little bit of smell when you walk into a store. Think of how much chemistry is changing when you eat a food. So we have to dig in and do this testing. Once we can start healing the body, getting rid of that immune reaction or slowing that immune reaction, you'll start to build self-tolerance, and you could, start tolerating walking in a store. There's other things and dietary things that can stimulate an immune reaction too. So we talked about different foods, cross-reactivities, getting tested for those things, but there's more data coming out on other things. Salt drives autoimmune disease by inducing pathological Th17 cells. So it's stimulating the cytokine Th17, which is a hyperinflammatory cytokine response, happen. It affects the brain, affects your joints, affects a lot of different tissues. And some people have that sensitivity where eating too much salt can cause can flare their autoimmune disease. Eating too much salt can flare your autoimmune disease. And multiple studies coming out of this. An interesting correlative study showed that patients with autoimmunity should try to consume potassium if they notice they react to salty foods. So this shouldn't be necessarily everybody with an autoimmune issue. And if they're going to eat salty foods, they should take potassium too. But if you notice, boy, I never thought of that, and I do love chips. I thought it was the corn chips. Maybe it's the salt, not the corn chips that you're eating. I did the test. I don't have any reactivity to corn. It is a cross-reactive. I stayed away from corn. How come I can eat cornbread, but I can't eat those salty chips? It may be the sodium. Try consuming potassium, but you have to consume, the study showed you have to consume about 1,000 milligrams of potassium, and most potassium supplements are only going to contain about 100 milligrams, so you'd have to take about 10 of them. On our store, we have a powdered potassium that a teaspoon contains 1,200 milligrams. So just try it. Try taking about 1,000 milligrams of potassium and eat those corn chips again, or whatever chips or salty food you're eating that you seem to constantly react to, and see if that diminishes the reaction and that salt is the bad guy in your diet. So something that you need to clinically look at. You need to observe these things. You need to pay attention to these things. We need to get you off the couch and feeling better again. Food coloring. It's another thing that's a big immune stimulant that can cause a flare in your immune system, that could cause a ramped up autoimmune reaction, and certainly neurobehavioral disorders. This is very common with parents see this with their kids with autism or any type of autism spectrum disorder. Food coloring can be a major reactivity because it fires an immune reaction. So if food coloring does do this, then you know you have self-antibodies, I'll guarantee it. And doing a self-antibody test would be important. Okay, we're doing really well. We only got a few slides left. Digestive enzymes. How important are digestive enzymes? Remember what a protein is. So when we're talking about food sensitivities, we're talking about IgA reactions to proteins. It's a reaction to a protein in the food, or as the protein breaks down, it's a reaction to the part of the protein that is called a peptide. So a peptide is a portion of a protein. So use gliadin as an example again, okay? We could use any food protein because it's the same with any food protein. But again, gliadin is the protein of gluten, and the peptides, there's multiple peptides as it breaks down to that you could be reacting to. So, but if you had a really healthy gut, plenty of adequate HCl in your stomach, plenty of health in your enzyme production of your pancreas and secretion of those enzymes into your small intestine, plenty of health of your liver in creating healthy bile, secreting that into your duodenal tract as well, then you would more adequately break down the proteins down to their final product, which is an amino acid or a dipeptide, two amino acids bonded together. You will never have a reaction. You do not develop antibodies to amino acids. You develop antibodies to peptides. So that's why I've said over and over again for decades, the most important supplement to take is HCl and digestive enzymes. The bottom line, if you could only take one supplement, it would be HCl and digestive enzymes. And to me, the US Enzymes brand, digestive enzymes, is there's nothing like it. Matter of fact, the parent company of US Enzymes actually makes a lot of enzymes for a lot of other nutritional companies. So you may be actually taking the enzymatic parent company, US Enzymes parent company, in your digestive enzyme. But here are the US enzyme, digestive enzyme. HCl enzyme, which is HCl plus a broad spectrum digestive enzyme. Glutathione is the best anti-gliadin enzyme there is. It has all the needed enzymes to help break down gluten and some of the cross-reactants of gluten. But Digestime Plus is by far the best broad spectrum enzyme on the market. The Digestimes, they're just hands down, there's nothing like it. So taking these, how should I take them? Should I take them before food? Should I take them with food, after food? The best way to take your enzymes is right before you're going to eat. Have it in your stomach so it's there before you eat. If you ate and you, I forgot to take it, you can take it. It's going to get in there. It's going to help break down that food. If you ate half an hour ago, oh, crud, can I still take my HCl enzyme? Yeah, you're getting to that edge of that. Food might have already emptied your stomach and into the small intestine. You're going to kind of miss it with the HCl enzyme. Still, you could probably take a Digestime and a glutathione. It will get into the duodenum and into the intestinal tract, but you're going to miss some of that food. So best to take it with your meal. Best is right before your meal. Even if you don't buy these, you can buy these on our store. But if you don't buy these, if you have enzymes at home, certainly take enzymes. Make sure you keep your enzymes out of the sun. They can degrade. Make sure you keep them in a cool place in your house. Enzymes, probably the most important nutritional supplement that you can be taking. And then I want to touch on a few other foods, the role of nightshades in autoimmunity. Nightshades, eggplant, tomatoes, bell peppers, and other peppers, not black pepper, contain alkaloid properties. They also contain lectin properties. We'll talk about lectins in a minute too. Lectin is a major problem with lectin is that it causes agglutination. Agglutination is, remember what I talked about, is the combination of different proteins or the combination of different peptides to actually form a neoprotein in themselves, which is a new protein that your immune system can react to. That's the problem with lectins. So lectin can lead to bacterial overgrowth, can damage the gut wall, and can affect, because of the neoprotein formation, that agglutination issue with lectins. So these are lectin foods that you may want to look at. Maybe that's my problem. It's mainly agglutination. It's the combination causing neoproteins, and I want to experiment with staying away from some lectin foods. Okay, we talked about agglutination with lectins. The role of lectins happens forming these new proteins that then I end up having an immune response against. So what do you do? This is so confusing and so depressing. Oh my goodness, I want to smash my head against the wall. Well, don't give up. So you've been dealing with this for a long time. My opinion is you get tested. Do the Cyrex Array 3X, the Cyrex 4, the Cyrex 10. If you want to test for antibodies, look at the other video on that. You can, if you're going to get a blood draw for these, you can do the Cyrex 7X, which tests for neurological antibodies, Cyrex 5, which tests for other tissue antibodies. I think those are all so valuable tests. How much are all those tests together? You'll spend less than $2,000 for those tests, and you'll know, at least a starting point on what to do and moving forward. There's just so much value there. So, and it's things that I'm making videos on all these tests so that you can then, you don't need to schedule an appointment with anybody. You can then look at those tests and interpret them themselves, look at the cross-reactive lists. You can start doing some self-investigation on your own diet, and oh my gosh, maybe that's why I react when I eat pineapple. I never thought of it that way before, and now it's because it's a cross-reactive of this. And so you'll be able to be your own investigator. That's what this whole courses are for. They're for to empower you to be your own investigator and to be your own doctor. Not that you don't seek the help of a doctor. We highly recommend that, but we want you to be empowered and that you're not that you're educated. So I think there's huge value in that. So down to the last few slides here, promise you. So dietary considerations with autoimmunity. For sure, let's say I can't afford any of these tests. I am just total broke ski. Well, then you definitely go off gluten, definitely go off dairy. Download the cross-reactive tests. Look at going grain-free, going nightshade-free, going lectin-free. And you can't just do it for a week and think, oh, that didn't really help. You have to do it for a period of time, months even, to see if you notice some calming down of your immune system. And this is where you have to, write down how you're feeling. Keep a diary of how you're feeling. You have to absolutely, bottom line, start with a gluten-free diet, go to a paleo diet, go to an autoimmune paleo diet. If you don't have the ability to test for the cross-reactive foods, download the forms from Cyrex that I'll have on here, the cross-reactive foods, and start eliminating some of those. Think about reducing sodium in your diet. That's salt. Could that be the problem? Didn't talk about stabilizing blood glucose, but that's an issue too. If you're eating a lot of sugar and your glucose is bouncing around, that's an issue that can stimulate an immune reaction. It's not bad to go to Target and buy yourself a little glucometer that you can test your blood glucose level in the morning and postprandial. That can be very helpful to help monitor and take care of you, right? So basic intestinal permeability diet. This is the slide you want to memorize. Avoiding gluten, avoiding dairy, avoiding processed foods, fast foods, fried foods. You're eating a lot of vegetables and fruit, fermented foods, rice and gluten, healthy oils, meats, of course. Oh, I don't like this. I can't eat fermented foods. I have a histamine issue. Okay, well then eliminate that too. Then you're getting to a more comprehensive diet. You're doing some testing. You're staying completely grain-free. You're staying dairy-free. You're staying away from particles of dairy like whey proteins. Staying away from GMO foods, so corn and soy. And so you're getting more specific in an autoimmune paleo diet. That's what this is called. This is a great way to start if you can't do the testing. You're still having problems. You can't get off the couch. You've never dealt with these things. You need to dig into them. Even if your diet is, I can only eat 4 foods, get tested, because if you're eating the same 4 foods all the time, there's a very strong possibility your gut is just destroyed because you don't have you're not getting a good probiotic array of bacteria growing in your gut because of your lack of foods in your diet. So this is the array 3 again. This is the array 4 again. And this is the array 10, which gives you all the different foods, not the specificity that you get with array 3 and 4. Some people just do array 10, but I'd highly suggest the combination of array 3, 4, and 10. There is a discount for those two, and we'll give you that discount forwarded to you if you need to get that. So again, we're looking at the stages of autoimmunity, trying to keep you in that silent stage if you already have elevated antibodies. And if you already are in stage 3 with tissue destruction, we're trying to quell that tissue destruction, calm down the inflammation. That's going to help calm down all your symptoms so that you can get your life back and live again But this isn't something that I did this for a period of time and now I'm all better. Now I can go back to eating junk and doing all this stuff. This is a lifestyle change as long as you have autoimmunity, which is forever. So these are lifestyle changes that you're going to get your life back. You have to be willing to do the work. No doctor is going to magically erase it. No magic pill is going to erase it. No magic supplement is going to erase it. No magic drug is going to erase it. This is work that you have to do. So stay with me. Watch our other videos that go into details on how to interpret the different arrays from Cyrex so that you can take care of yourself. We're trying to empower you in everything. Know that we're praying for you. Hope this is a help. Bye-bye.